Ultron is on his way home. Can the Avengers stop him? Welcome to the Complete Story Series, where I take trade paperbacks and single issues and I break them down into adjustable bites so that I can read them dramatically back to you. All alterations to the panels, text, and images are to prevent copyright problems, and all art is owned by its respective companies. Ultron returned, and he battled against the Avengers, who almost defeated him in the Rage of Ultron storyline. But in the end, Hank Pym allowed himself to be absorbed by Ultron, and then the merged version went off into space where the Avengers assumed he died. Hank Pym was then honored for his heroic life, and they thought the threat was over. But what has Ultron been doing in space this whole time, because he wasn't defeated? While paying a visit to Gambit in New Orleans, Rogue gets a call from Steve Rogers that they have a priority alarm. There's a capsule attempting re-entry from the International Space Station, but it hits some debris and it needs assistance landing. The capsule should be falling between Cleveland and New Jersey, but he needs to go. Him and Deadpool are taking down extremists in a wildlife preserve. Rogue reports that she'll handle it, but as she gets closer to the falling capsule, she sees that someone else is there to intercept it and brings it down to land. As Rogue lands next to the situation, she tells the person thanks for the save, and then she sees that that person is Hank Pym. He tells her that it's nice to see a friendly face, and it's great that intelligent apes haven't taken over since he's been off in space. Rogue looks at the suit that he's wearing and asks, what is that? And Hank tells her she knows what it is. It's Ultron. We've merged, and I've mastered Ultron. I just needed some time to get used to it. Rogue tells him that she's glad to hear it. They should go find Captain America and give him the good news. Over in the wildlife preserve, Steve and Deadpool are taking out the extremists while Deadpool shoots one of the men, telling him that he only gets one warning shot. Once they capture the men, one of the men shouts that they are traitors to their species. They should be standing with them, not opposing them. The Inhumans are taking over. Deadpool tells him, yeah. Just like when the mutants were before them and the mutant Ninja Turtles before everyone else and blah, blah, blah. They took our jobs. Rogue radios over to Steve, stating that she's inbound to his location, and he says that they're almost done here. No need. And then Rogue says, why do they all have to run? And Steve gets that and says, copy, see you soon. He then turns over to Deadpool, telling him Rogue's in trouble. She used the duress code. Steve calls in the full squad unity to assemble on his position. As Hank and Rogue float down, Deadpool gives them a holy poop emoji. Steve then mentions that Janet gave a wonderful eulogy, and Hank says that he would like to see her when they're ready. He's conquered Ultron, and Steve tells him, I would like to believe that, Hank. And then behind them, the rest of the Unity squad appears, and Cable asks, I trust that you'll be submitting to a peer review then. Hank says that he was hoping he wouldn't have to do this, but then his body begins to separate piece by piece, and he tells them that as they can see, there's not much organic matter left, but it's still him. And now, he needs something from them. The suit then puts itself back together, and Hank tells them that he hasn't had a burger in months. He's gonna see them all back at the mansion. After Hank flies off, Steve orders Rogue to keep an eye on him while the rest of the Unity squad go back to the theater. And when they get back there, he needs to make a call to Janet. Later, Rogue and Hank sit down after Hank has had something to eat, and he mentions that it's a disgrace what they did to the Avengers' home. It's now a cheesy tourist trap. Rogue tells him that the money that they made from the Avengers mansion saved lives, and Hank says that some things are more important than money, like legacy. Where did they put it? Where did they put his memorial? So, Rogue takes Hank over to the statue of him, and Hank asks, did anyone go looking for me? Or did you all just rush and put this up? She tells him that they thought he sacrificed himself to save the world, and then Hank reaches out to the statue, stating, this is a lie! He's not dead! Suddenly, the giant statue of him explodes, and Hank says, that was stupid, but it felt really good. Rogue tells him, you're only human, right? And then the two of them fly off with Hank stating that it's great to be home. Hank Pym is back. Hank quickly returns to active duty, fighting against some monsters in the New York subway. But as they begin to wrap up, Rogue and Hank notice that there are still more creatures in the subway. Hank mentions that he had a date, and Rogue tells him to go ahead, she'll handle it. As the doors open, Janet flies through, zapping the creature, stating that she thought she would join in on the fun. And after she finishes up and grows back to normal size, Hank hugs her. And then Janet goes back to being small, stating she should go somewhere private. Once they fly up to the top of a building, Hank asks how she is, and Janet tells him that he's the one who's been lost in space and now merged with Ultron. How is he? He sits down and he tells her that it was a struggle. They were at each other's throats for so long, and neither of them wanted to admit to the other that they had a legitimate point of view. He then looks over and he says, I like the new uniform. That's a nice necklace too. She tells him that it's from a friend, and right now, he needs to decompress from all of this. Find a place to heal, like maybe go back to that beach on Montauk. He sits up and he says, yeah, I would like that. And that's when Janet says that she needs to go. So Hank looks up and sees the drone watching him, and Janet tells him goodnight. She flies over to a nearby building where Steve is watching Hank, and he asks for her thoughts. She tells him it's worse than she imagined. Her and Hank have never been to that beach, and Hank hates beaches. They need to call up the reserves or something. Get them in the air, because it may look and sound like Hank, but that's not Hank. Steve asks if she's sure, and Janet mentions she still has Hank's living will, and in bold letters it states, do not resuscitate. He never wanted to be a half corpse hooked up to a machine. Just look at him. Ultron murdered Hank, and now he's wearing his face. Keeping a drone on him isn't enough. But Steve tells her he doesn't have a drone on him. Back over at the theater, Johnny sits with Cable while he works on his arm, telling him that he has something important to ask him. He's been waiting for months to hear some news. Is there a date in the future? Deadpool then walks in on the conversation and finishes the sentence. If Half-Life 3 is ever gonna drop? Both of them just look at Deadpool and he asks, he thought Johnny said it was important. Cable says that he's not sure if Sue and Reed are alive, which is good news because that means that he can still keep faith on it. Soon they hear clapping and Hank walks in stating that at least their friends remembered him. Now, if only the Avengers cared that much about their members as the Fantastic Four, maybe he wouldn't have been forgotten in space. While Hank goes on, Cable receives a message stating that Hank flunked the test. And Cable tells him, you're right. You once caught lightning in a bottle, but that was a long time ago. Reed has been gone less time than you, and they're statues. You were a genius. Just unlucky to be a genius in a time of gods. Hank begins to cough, stating that at least you're being honest. The Avengers wouldn't even exist without me. I take one for the team and I'm still the bad guy, still not to be trusted. As the coughing continues, he then asks, what do I need to do? And that's when wires begin to pop out of Hank's mouth. And Cable aims his gun, telling Johnny, get behind me. That's when the voice of Ultron comes out stating, we tried it the boring way, now we go loud. Ultron's face begins to cover one side of Hank's head, and it begins to shine, and then a massive explosion goes off, blowing up the theater. Janet flies through, and Deadpool begins to open fire on Hank, and he says, he will destroy Deadpool, and then they can finish their chat from earlier. Janet grabs her necklace, and she pushes the button, and that's when a giant blue light blasts through Hank, and he falls to his knees. She states that her mini EMP will only slow him down. Take the shot, Deadpool. So Steve runs in and tells Deadpool not to fire. They don't take lives, but Janet says, Ultron murdered Hank. Steve tells Deadpool not to, and Janet yells for him to take the shot. So, Deadpool fires. The shot goes by Hank's ear, and Deadpool tells him, that was a warning shot. My finger's still on the trigger. Stand down. And then Hank extends his arm, and a giant spike goes through Deadpool. Hank then tosses him to the side. Hank then stands over Steve, telling him, your greatest enemy has returned, and you let him walk among you. And Steve says, you know what they say, keep your friends close, and then Vision appears through the ground, flying up and punching Hank, and keep your enemies closer. Hank's body flies through debris, and Vision quickly flies over, landing on him and punching him over and over again. As Vision looks down on Hank, he says that he's been watching him ever since he returned. He thought that Hank had gotten through to him, but Ultron's voice comes through stating, you are mistaken. We are Ultron. And then Hank's voice tells them, we are also Hank Pym. Hank launches forward, trying to hit Vision, and the two of them struggle as they fly through buildings, hitting each other. During this up in space, Carol receives word to initiate Project Icarus by Vision. Carol sends out the order to Alpha Flight to deploy, and then from the station, a small ship leaves, and the report goes out that the ordnance is inbound. Back on Earth, Vision and Hank continue fighting when Vision hits Hank so hard that it sends him flying out of the building. Cable then radios Janet, telling her that they need her back at the base. They have an Avenger down, and they need the EMP. Meanwhile, through the hole in Deadpool's chest, Ultron's device begins to burrow and spread throughout Deadpool's body. Deadpool's body begins to convulse, and he shouts to them to just kill him! Synapse then says it's beginning to get closer to his brain, and Janet calls out for Vision to bring Hank back to the base. As Vision rockets down into the park where Hank fell, he tells her he will try. Hank gets back up, ripping a tree out of the ground, and then he smacks Vision with it. As Vision is knocked away, Ultron sees a purple flash, and he says, I was wondering when you would show up. Seconds later, Quicksilver appears running around Ultron, punching him, asking if they need him back at the HQ. That's when Rogue flies in, tackling Ultron from behind, stating that they can do it. But Ultron slams his elbow down on Rogue's head and throws her body to the ground, telling her, stay down. Quicksilver runs over, grabbing Ultron, throwing him into the street towards people. But before he can punch him again, Ultron grabs his fist, telling him, outrun this. Ultron then grabs the rest of Quicksilver and begins to bend his body and legs until his bones begin to snap. The rest of the Avengers all run over, taking their swings at Ultron, but he tells them, now you are showing your true colors. You hated Hank as much as you hate me. Janet tells him that he was the mistake that Hank regretted the most, and now thanks to his technology, they'll end him forever. She then pushes a button and the EMP goes off again, stunning Ultron, and Cable says that the machine inside of Deadpool is now inert. Is he ready? And Deadpool tells him, do it on 3. Cable skips 1 and 2, and he calls out 3, and then the machines inside of Deadpool begin to tear and rip outside of him. Cable says that this isn't the first time he's done surgery by telekinesis, and as Deadpool lays back down, he says, "Dear Avenger form, I didn't think it would happen to me, but..." Steve then says they need to separate Hank's body out of that Ultron thing, but Cable calls out telling them to pull back the wound, and the AI in his arm is booting back up, and that means that Ultron is going to be getting back up as well. Steve grabs his shield and he slams it down onto Ultron's torso, stating, "Let's see him stand with no legs. I don't know if Hank's alive, but we can sort that out after we rip him apart." Ultron begins to shout, "I'm awake!" And then he punches Steve away into a nearby building, and Vision tells everyone, "Get clear." Vision then runs up to grab a hold of Ultron, and he tells him, "Such arrogance to try and defeat me alone." But Vision tells him, "Incorrect. I just sought to keep you here in the landing zone." Ultron looks up, and that's when the Hulkbuster suit drops on him, and Tony says, "Hiya, it's been a long time." Ultron jumps back up, punching the suit away, stating, "These stupid suits can't even stop Banner. You think they can stop me?" Then Tony tells him, "We're not trying to stop you, just contain you." Hulkbuster open. The suit then opens up, showing no one inside, and then the suit begins to stuff Ultron inside of it, closing it up. Cable says that the target is secure and ready for transportation, and Rogue says, "Thank you." And that's when her, Vision, Voodoo, and Janet all begin to fly up into space, and Tony states that he's logging off of the suit, and Vision is in full command now. Everyone begins to board the transport ship holding the Hulkbuster suit, and they begin to take off. But that's when Ultron begins to rip out of the suit, stating, "We're in space now, aren't we?" Voodoo begins to use his magics, telling Ultron to join him in the swamps of Ogun. Here, he will deal with all of the people that he's murdered, and as the bodies begin to float to the surface, they begin to state their entire planet is gone. More and more bodies appear, and Voodoo asks, "What have you done?" And that's when Hank's voice tells him, "Don't worry, I left the strongest of the alien planets to make sure that they knew where my home was." The spirit trap begins to fade, and Voodoo says, "It's a galactic genocide, entire planets murdered." Ultron then breaks through the Hulkbuster suit, grabbing Janet, telling her, "No more EMP bursts from you, thank you." She shrinks and escapes, but in doing so drops the necklace, and Ultron grabs it, crushing it. Janet then flies to the cockpit, shouting, "Ultron's free!" And Vision shouts for everyone to get to the escape pods, but Ultron then grabs Vision, slamming him into the control panel, stating, "None of you are leaving now. Now let's see where we're going." As Ultron looks out of the cockpit, he tells them, "Very sneaky trying to fly me into the sun." And Rogue shouts out, "And you won't be going anywhere either." She then punches the navigation controls. Ultron states that she just destroyed their navigation. She has doomed them all. And as the systems begin to fail and catch fire, Johnny begins to absorb the heat, and then Rogue grabs Ultron, telling him that they will be finishing their mission. Once Ultron is back on the ground, Vision asks, "If this is their end, then let him understand his motive. Why the farce? You came to Earth wearing your master's flesh to deceive us. You didn't want to kill the Avengers. You wanted to be an Avenger." Vision then grabs Ultron by the neck, telling him, "Hank Pym was special. He was gifted and flawed. He created and he destroyed, and he was destroyed by his creation. That kind of symmetry is rare in nature." He then begins to punch Ultron repeatedly until he stops and tells him, "You will cease to exist." And then he stomps his chest into the control panel, and he tells Johnny to fuse the machine to the deck. Johnny begins to release the fire that he's been building up, and Ultron tells him, "Please, wait!" in Hank's voice. And Johnny says, "It sounds so much like Hank." But Vision tells him, "It is not him. Put his voice from your mind." Carol then calls out that Alpha Flight Rescue is coming in hot, though not as hot as they are probably right now. Voodoo grabs the team and begins to teleport them all over to Carol's ship, and once there, Rogue asks permission to come aboard. And Carol tells her, "That's funny. She doesn't remember her ever asking before." Carol begins to get them out of there, but Rogue stops her. "We need to stay and watch this." As the transport ship flies off, everyone else can't help but not watch, as they have to say goodbye to their friend again. Back in the transport, Ultron says, "All life comes from the stars, and now we will die inside of one." But Hank tells him, "Hold that thought. Small change of plans." The ship flies into the sun and buries itself deep. And then Ultron asks, "Am I dead?" And Hank says, "I'm not sure." Deep inside of the sun, Ultron managed to crawl out into a neutrino, and then he waits. Hank says they will wait here till they are ejected by a solar wind. And then Ultron says, "And on that day, I will prove Vision wrong, and he will be the last Avenger to die." Ultron's still not dead, but this does give us some closure to the story with Hank. Was he still alive? Well, as it turns out, he was. It was probably one of my favorite stories in the all-new, all-different Marvel that came out of the recent stuff. What I really love about it is the fact that Deadpool's there, but he really doesn't have much going on because he really wasn't friends with Hank, so they didn't just wrap him into it because he's Deadpool. What did you guys think of the story, and what did you guys think about the return of Ultron? Let me know in the comments down below or on Twitter @Comicstorian or on Instagram @Comicstorian, and I'll see you next time right here.